Hi, everyone. So wonderful that you're all able to join us tonight. I am Nasrin Himada. I am the curator here at Plug In Institute of Contemporary Art, which is located on Treaty 1 territory. The territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Treaty 1 was signed in 1871, taking this territory from 7 local Anishinaabe First Nations in order to make the land available for settler use and ownership. Plug In is an institution, and institutions are fraught places historically conditioned by the colonial structures that create them for settler use and ownership. Here at Plug In, we are thinking and feeling through this as we recognize the ways in which art institutions continue to contribute to the settler colonial narrative and embody its politic. While we acknowledge the limitations that we might come up against, here at Plug In, we continue to center the questions and challenges that will lead institutions toward constant transformation. And those questions are, what are the commitments of Plug In when it comes to decentering settler narratives and knowledge? What changes are being implemented and will be implemented? And how are they motivated by the possibilities that open up when structural transformation is at the heart of the work that is to be done and that must be done? The art that I love is one that troubles our understanding of the world, one that shifts our ways of being in order to transform, work that moves us toward accountability, to be accountable with each other and to the promises we make, to put us to task in order to implement change. I hope, and in my capacity to do so, these changes will not be symbolic and are not reduced to superficial modes of inclusivity, equity, or diversity, but are concrete and ongoing. This means that as curator of Plug In, I will continue to center the work of Indigenous artists, Black artists, artists of color whose contribution to contemporary art is vast, has a long history, and continues to rock the foundations of colonial settler provenance. Here at Plug In, we aim to showcase programs and exhibitions that not only challenge us or encourage us to ask questions differently, but move us toward new connections, collectivities, feelings never felt before, new imaginings of otherworldly existence that give life to possibility within what often seems impossible. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I introduce Gelare Khoshgozaran, our speaker for the evening. Gelare's artist talk, Terrorientalist Landscapes, is in conjunction with her solo exhibition of Sindbad and Sandbox that was up at Plug In. Unfortunately, we've had to close our galleries last week when the city of Winnipeg went into the red alert, but hopefully we're able to open in a few weeks, and those of you who didn't get a chance to see the exhibition are able to see it soon enough. In the meantime, we have Gelare with us tonight, where she'll contextualize the exhibition within her larger practice and preoccupations with simulation, landscape, and surrogacy in the construction of different sites of violence. It is a bit intense for me to say this in this moment, that this is a timely conversation, considering what is going on in the US with the election, but all over the world because of the pandemic. More sites of violence have been exposed by both because of the direct result of a brutal, punishing, and self-serving leadership, not only in the US, but elsewhere. I think it is timely because while it is more challenging to focus on things like art and our practice within it, I really do think in offering to do so and having this conversation gives a different sense of time and of being other than what is being produced for us because of the severe consequence of abuse of power. So I really do continue to believe in art's potential to give us life. And I mean life in the sense of what comes alive and to give us hope and to give us something to hold on to as a way out of what we are witness to day. There's a relation between art and healing. Norbese Philip taught me that. Denise Ferrer de Silva also taught me that. And it creates for us a different sense of place in order to think and feel more expansively. And I know I spoke to Gelare earlier when we were preparing for this, and when we spoke, I know you had said something to the effect of, I don't know how to talk about art right now. And I didn't get a chance to answer, to respond then. But I think more than ever, we need to be thinking and talking about it, about your own practice in particular, because in your practice, you create a method of revealing things that have gone on unseen. So even talking about it is a way for all of us to learn more, to listen more, and to be present more. And I think so many artists like yourself develop a mode of ethics in their practice that can be helpful to all of us. Gelare refers to herself as an undisciplinary artist, which I love because I think it puts emphasis on process and relation and time as one builds on their practice, and it highlights the possibilities that emerge from what is not known yet and what is to come. She's a writer as well, and in 2009 was transplanted from street protests in a city of four seasons to the windowless rooms of the University of Southern California, where aesthetics and politics were discussed in endless summers. Her work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions at the New Museum, the Queen's Museum, the Hammer Museum, at the LAXART, Human Resources, at the Visitor Welcome Center, at Articule in Montreal, and Yarat Contemporary Art Space in Baku, among many more. She was also the recipient of many awards and grants, including the Creative Capital Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writers Grant, an Art Matters Award, the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award, and most recently, a Graham Foundation Award. Her words have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, in Parkett, Extra, the LA Review of Books, Art Practical, Ajam Media Collective, amongst others. She was also the co-founder and co-editor and contributor of a great art publication called Contemporary. Before I pass it on to Gelare, I want to remind the audience that they can send questions throughout the talk on our Facebook chat, on our YouTube chat, or you can email us at questions@plugin.org. Gelare, I want to welcome you. Thank you for being here with us tonight. I know it was a bit difficult too.
No, not at all. Thank you, Nasrin, for this very generous and warm introduction. I do feel like I need to preface this talk with saying that it was something that I was really looking forward to, and I am still looking forward to it, specifically to be in conversation with you, whom I had previously collaborated with and had the honor of working with in different capacities, but also as a friend and an interlocutor that through the years we have sustained a conversation about both of our practices and also the overlaps there, and also shared very endearing moments over food and other sources of pleasure. Mm-hmm. But it was very difficult to wrap my head around the fact that we're gathering together to talk about my process as an artist. And I do feel a little out of breath, both physically and psychologically. And I know that a lot of us are in that state. So in preparation for my talk today, I was hitting the wall anywhere, in any direction that I looked. And often both with projects and also with writing and in preparation for talks, I often, when that happens, I go back and look at my notes or previous writings and other talks as well. And I found my notes from a talk that I gave in 2018 at the even 2017. I don't remember if it was 17 or 18, but at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson. And I, reading over my notes, I felt like that would be kind of a perfect preface for both an introduction to my work, but also reflecting on the conditions under which we practice as artists and how much of that some of us really embody in our practices and in the different ways that we process aesthetics. And I'm going to start with that, but also for the sake of making it more accessible, I'm going to share my screen so that you don't have to just listen to my voice, and it's easier if you follow the text. I'm going to start my talk today with a few recent pieces and works in progress, ideas I have engaged with over the past few years, obsessions and works in progress. As our media is saturated every day with images and headlines of violence, as fatigue overshadows our shock and anger for fascism, as we nod in silence to ourselves, this is the world we have created as a species, some can intellectually apprehend the scale and impact of the disasters we are causing globally, environmental, economical, political, etc. For those who have experienced firsthand the impacts of such disasters as war, famine, siege, apartheid, sanctions, displacement, dictatorship, et al., this apprehension is always also in the form of remembering. Instead of observing the trajectory of something and predicting where it is going next, you are inserted in a narrative that is both a past you have been a part of and a future that you are inevitably going to be a part of. This embodied apprehension of historical narrative is the crux of my practice, both as an artist and a writer, and where I want to begin and end this talk. The position of the artist as witness in this historical narrative is of utmost power and importance, less as a victim in the middle of an inevitable narrative of dystopic annihilation, more a voice with the agency and tools to aestheticize. The question of what to aestheticize and how to do so are the two that define an artist's practice, and what differentiates most fundamentally the artist from the propagandist, the decorator, the observer, the predator, what separates the caring from the exploitative, the outsider, disaster tourist from the subversive insider. So I thought that I would start with this and move on to a couple of more slides with my recent work that has been a work in progress. And you know, these notes are not really refined because they were supposed to be my notes sharing with an audience, not a finished piece of writing. Now I'm going to move on to a different text. If you're sending goods to an embargoed country, your shipment may require an export license from the Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, or Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC. BIS and OFAC administer and enforce US laws that impose sanctions on Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, and certain other countries. These laws broadly prohibit exports to people and organizations in embargoed countries without a license or other authorization from BIS or OFAC. Whether or not you need an export license, you may also need to file electronic export information with the Census Bureau. You can do this through an online system called the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE. When you have done your filing, you will receive a confirmation number called an internal transaction number, or ITN, which you must enter on your customs declaration from before mailing. For shipments to embargoed countries, there are very limited situations where census filing and INT are not required. These exceptions, you still see my screen, right? Am I sharing screen?
It doesn't look like it on my end, but 1 second.
Oh, okay, so that's what I forgot, okay. And I was just reading without sharing screen too. I forgot that I made my page full screen, but I didn't share screen.
Oh, there you go. Okay,
here we go. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. I'm so not organized with this multitasking. Okay, here we go. Maybe I'll start again. If you're sending goods to an embargoed country, your shipment may require an export license from the Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS, or Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC. BIS and OFAC administer and enforce US laws that impose sanctions on Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, and certain other countries. These laws broadly prohibit exports to people and organizations in embargoed countries without a license or other authorization from BIS or OFAC. Whether or not you need an export license, you may also need to file an electronic export information with the Census Bureau. You can do this through an online system called the Automated Commercial Environment, or ACE. When you have done your filing, you will receive a confirmation number called an Internal Transaction Number, or ITN, when you must enter on your customs declaration form before mailing. For shipments to embargoed countries, there are very limited situations where a census filing and ITN are not required. These exceptions may differ according to the country to which you are mailing. For additional details on when an export license and or census filing may be required, please consult USPS publication 699, Special Requirement for Shipping Internationally. This is available online at http://about.usps.com/publication/pub699.pdf. To determine whether your shipment requires an export license, you can contact BIS at 202-482-4811 or ecdoexs@bis.doc.gov and OFAC at 202-622-2490 or OFAC_feedback@treasury.gov. So after years of having a one-way relationship to the postal service where I would be receiving packages from Iran that mostly had to do with my research, containing of different materials from different random archives to personal items to books and documents in the packages that were on display at the show at Plug In, titled U.S. Customs Demands to Know. I attempted to send a package back to my parents, both as a thank you for all the years of helping me with different projects, but also as a means of opening up the other way of this one-way street and trying to understand if I'm able at all to send anything back home. And this is the first package that was returned to me pretty quickly after shipping it, about a week or 10 days. It came back, and from the look of it, I knew that there's a lot to study in this package to understand what happened and if there's a way to go around it. So I did what they told me, which was read this letter before opening the parcel. And the letter had the instructions that I just read for you. And then there's more detailed instructions as to how to do this and go about the process. So I went on the website and I talked to friends and, asked and looked for some empirical information and experience, and then also followed the instructions on the form to see if I'm able to do this. And this was also part of the paperwork that showed that I needed an ITN, which is an international, I don't remember what it stands for, something number, international transaction number, or export number or something. Which, the content of what I was sending my parents, I believe, was 2 facial creams that, my mom, among others, are obsessed with. And, I could buy it online, and I was thinking of sending it to her. And I had bought a set of funnels for my dad, because I was doing on this project that had to do with oil, and somehow he mentioned that he had these funnels that he really liked that he didn't have anymore. So I ordered these aluminum funnels that are for chemicals like I don't know, gasoline or something. And then I put them in the package and I tried to ship them, which was what came back to me. So then I started the kind of direct contact way of, because the amount of pages in those PDFs and the information was really confusing. So I wrote them and I asked them how I can do this, and how I can follow these instructions to be able to send this package, because it met the requirements. You need to be a US citizen or permanent resident. And your package needs to be, the content of the package has to be under $100 worth. And there's a lot of other limitation in terms of the weight and the size and the content and, the regular stuff. So, knowing that I met those requirements, I wanted to make sure that I'm able to do this. So they got back to me with a little bit more detailed information and directed me to other PDFs. But then at some point they said, you can show this email as a proof that that you meet the requirements or the criteria to be able to ship this shipment. So I printed out their email and I highlighted the parts that made me qualify for sending the shipment, and I included in the next package, and I put a warning, kind of a similar return to sender symbol, so that they would read the text before the post office would return my package back to me again. So, and these are the parts that make me make it, yeah, like I was not sending nuclear proliferation instructions or materials, or like missile technology or biological weapons, for example. Why would my parents need more of that? We had plenty of that thanks to the US and Germany and other places. Yeah, so like this part that says the importation into the United States of Iranian origin goods from Iran or a third country, and the exportation from the United States to Iran of goods are authorized for goods sent as gifts to persons, provided that the value of each gift is no more than $100. The goods are of a type and quantities normally given as gifts between individuals, and the goods are not blah, blah, blah. There's a lot more to that. Sorry, like I flipped the 2 pages. But basically, there's a lot of open-endedness here. What are the typical gifts that are given between individuals? I was giving my dad funnels, and also, the value of under $100. It's interesting when you do the translation between that and what's happening with currency in countries under embargo, for example, in Iran. So that was the procedure of, this is kind of like, I think about it as the aftermath of this project, or like the afterlife of this project, which is ongoing. And I started it, I started the transaction in 2013, but I started thinking of it as art or as a way of displaying this process in 2016. And I think of it as ongoing. So I will continue doing this for as long as the sanctions remain. So, going from, so the 2 shows that are in the exhibition, I'm going to briefly talk about the other piece as well. I feel like what brought the 2 pieces, I had never shown these 2 pieces together, and in conversation with Nasrin, when we decided on the display and the pieces to include in the show, I was really excited to see them together, because the one of the issues that remain still is that for example, there's a lot of conversation that I don't even know how to take them seriously, but like to think that the current president of the US is anti-war, which I feel like it's the funniest thing you can ever possibly say, just because the traditional forms of war are not making as much profit as other proxy wars or hybrid wars, as Vijay Prashad calls them. It doesn't mean that somebody has an anti-war stance. I used to identify pretty strongly as an anti-war artist. Whenever I was trying to think about kind of like the elevator pitch, as you call it, or like this, like the package of the artist, short, brief artist statement, which I had a really hard time with, and I still do. I felt like the crux of my work has to do with representations of violence and war, and the position of an artist as anti-war, and what does that mean? And I feel like over time that has changed a lot. At some point I was looking a lot more at queer theory as a field that really allowed me to think about place and time and temporality, and inside and outside, in ways that were really intellectually and emotionally and aesthetically really kind of it was opening up possibilities for me. And I feel like over the years I moved on to thinking of myself more as an anti-war artist, queer or not, and I feel like that had brought a different angle to my work and my positionality in my engagement with my subjects. And currently I identify something else, but but they're all overlapping at the same time. So these are some of the kind of the archival, the background process of how I arrived at the other piece in the work, the video piece, Medina Wasl, or Connecting Town, which is a video from 2018. These are some initial photos that I was looking at. This is from southern Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, and this iconic image, black and white and color images of a kind of like a beheaded palm tree were very dominant in the media, as images of the war kept coming through TV and newspapers, and even for those of us who were privileged to not be living by the border at the time, the dominant or the iconic images of the war were these like burnt palm trees or like broken palm trees and in the dry desert. So, and this is the area that I'm talking about. It's near the Iran-Iraq border, which was the contested area that initially, was the cause of the war. And this is from a few years, this is from 2017, but then living in LA and having this relationship with the palm tree as this kind of manicured staple of the landscape in the city and all its representations in the mainstream cinema and its associations with leisure and wealth, or not, just LA. It's very LA. And so I got curious into looking more into this history of, how the palms ended up here, and which is something that many other artists in different ways have engaged with. Some I relate to, some I rather not take seriously. And it became kind of a thing of looking at sort of imagined geographies and the different names that are assigned to them. And even looking back at the term Middle East, which is a contested term that a lot of people from the region don't really use, because it's just, it puts a large swath of area with different people, different ethnicities and religious practices and races and different cultures and food and music and everything lumped together in this overarching, in this area that's defined in relation to the West, the middle of the East, which means really nothing. And of course, the roots of the word are in the military. It comes from the British Indian office, colonial office, and and tracking that kind of parallel of the existence of date palms that were brought to California in the 1920s and cultivated here, and the way that they were marketed and they were supposed to be presented as a new kind of exotic, desirable fruit and whatever came with that. And kind of tracing this history briefly. Again, like there's a lot of projection, right? There's this Algerian oasis imagined in the middle of the desert, which is, what it has a lot of it has a lot of pros, I wouldn't say advantages to it, because of its proximity to Los Angeles. So you don't need to travel to Africa when you can just drive 2 hours and be in an Algerian oasis, whatever that means. So, and then I started looking at, okay, so the term Middle East, and then there's a town called Mecca, and there's, when you go to, if you've been to Coachella, which I've been for this research, there's like Arabia Boulevard, there's a whole kind of performance or I don't know, an image of this area being somewhere else, which was initially, like I was drawn to it in like maybe like a perverse way that, this is close to home, but whatever that means, and it's probably like being Italian, going to Vegas and feeling nostalgic. There's some element to that. So I kind of looked back at this history, and I'm going to go over these slides because there's a lot of them. There's not much time to get into the details right now. A lot of it will come out probably in conversation with Nasrin. So I kind of traced that alongside looking at the proximity of these sites where these fairs would happen, in parallel to the military training sites that are essentially set as simulacra of Middle Eastern towns. Again, like looking at the origins of that word and thinking about the ironies of a town representing a Middle Eastern town, and like what are the layers of that. So I became interested in actually going there and revisiting these sites, from the training site to the site of the county fair. So the film came out of that process and that visiting. And again, it was important to have that embodied experience of visiting these sites of violence and going through the experience of being there with other people and trying to experience it as a form of entertainment, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. And then the other part of that is that the audio also that's in the film, if you watched it, it's a text that I edited out of interviews that I did with veterans of the Gulf War to Afghanistan and to Iraq. And I put an ad on Craigslist, and I marketed it as a gig, as a small gig, if someone wants to talk to me about the memories of what the landscape looked like wherever they were deployed. So I sat with these strangers and, I listened to their descriptions of how they would describe the space, the smells, the colors, and the environment. So out of their testimonies or their narratives came this hybrid text that I edited, and I hired voice actors to play their roles. And that's how the voice aspect of the sound came from. And then I worked with sound designer Jimena Sarno, who composed the other elements of the sound to kind of also create another dimension to the experience of the space through the existence of both these narratives and also weaving them into the sounds that would allude to the presence of some of the elements that they mention in their recollections. So this is from the I would say 1940s, 30s, 40s, and this is the current day of this architecture that still exists, and the fair still goes on. So I think maybe this is a good time to stop. I mean, I can always answer any questions, Nasrin, if you think this is a good way to start having a back and forth between the two of us.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Gelare, for giving us a bit more context. Yeah, just to let people know too, the film is about 30 minutes and it's titled Medina Wasl, Connecting Town. And maybe I would love to hear more, just since we're on this topic, maybe I would love to hear more about the title and how it connects to the film. Mm-hmm.
That's very useful, and maybe I can continue sharing screen a little bit. So this is the thing again. They say basically these villages that exist are not just one. There's multiple tiny little villages in even this one base that I visited, which is called the Fort Irwin National Training Center, which is the size of Rhode Island. So it's massive, and there's 8 villages in this one base itself, and multiple other bases have their own combat towns, as they call them, immersive combat towns. And but this one was the one that at some point I feel like a lot of artists and scholars were going to visit, because it was one of the first ones that the military actually openly made it available to the public as both, a form of, I guess, entertainment, but also making it, they promoted it as, come see what how your troops get like the state of the art training or something like that. So, it's open to the public. Everyone can sign up. They offer tours like a few times a year, depending on the weather, because it gets really hot. So one of these famous towns that a lot of people visited was called Medina Wasl, which I don't really, I don't know, I'm not fluent in Arabic, but I knew enough that there's something maybe a little off about this, and I don't really understand what they're trying to say. I could get that Medina is city, and Wasl from wasl, it comes from connecting, but I don't know if this doesn't quite make sense. This is feminine, this is masculine. And I talked to friends who were Arabic speaking, and I guess we suspected what they needed to say was that this is a connecting town between their location in the US, where they're getting training to get to the actual town to be ready for combat, because that's the premise of these cities. So this is the Arabic transliteration translated into English, and then when you put that back into Google Translate, it translates to city arrived. And then when you do connecting town, you don't actually get Medina Wasl, you get Medina wrapped. So the title basically came out of this, again, like thinking about like fictional and imagined geographies, this non-existing place really that, and even the name doesn't really hold up or mean anything. But what was interesting is that this is what it's supposed to be, because there's this one part in the village that's supposed to be the souk, or the bazaar, where people are selling you things. The merchants are selling you things that are made of plaster and fake eggs or whatever. But a big part of this kind of the pedagogical aspect of this tour or this site for the soldiers is also training them on language and culture, because the idea behind these towns and the sort of immersive trainings was that given the disaster that happened in Afghanistan, they wanted to make sure that the troops are familiar with what they're going and the environment that they're going. So that's why when we took the tour, for example, one of the sounds that's present in the space at the beginning of the tour is the sound of azan that they keep playing over and over and over again to make you familiar with what Arabic sounds like. Of course, Arabic is synonymous with Islam. There's no question about that. That's how they frame it. And in this alley too, there's these signs of these stores or businesses that, as you can see, you have the title in Arabic, and you have the transliteration, the translation, and a label that breaks down for you what language this is, if you had any doubts. So and this is another base. This is in San Diego, but that's and that was the whole point of, I guess, me appropriating this like basically sense, like nonsense title that they have given to this town, and kind of thinking about that as a way of thinking about other connecting geographies, and how I can complicate this, complicate other notions of borders that exist as constructs in the region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I just getting a bit of a check-in from the tech team. They're wondering if you still wanted to share your screen or not.
Oh yeah, I keep doing that. I keep full screening without sharing my screen. I keep talking to myself. Here we go. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk to you instead of myself. This is the sound that I was talking about. So the title, the transliteration, the translation, and the language.
Mm-hmm.
Same with all of these signs, all of these businesses, and yeah, the fruit, the eggs. So again,
yeah.
And this is the other base that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Awesome, thank you. I feel like I have maybe a two-part question. how do you feel about these two works being shown together? Because you had mentioned they'd never been shown together before. And I'm so sad you couldn't even see it in person, but yeah, just wondering about how you're feeling about that. But also in your talk, or in your description for your talk, you had mentioned the term surrogacy. And I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit or tell us a bit more about that preoccupation.
Yeah. Okay, I think I will go with the first question. I mean, the reason why I said I was happy to see these two works shown together, which I hadn't before, was one, again, this contrasting these two forms of war, one very recognizable, one very kind of, I mean, recognizable for it's still not a lot of people, but like for recognizable for those who can identify the basic levels of violence in occupying an entire country, for example, for exporting the versions of democracy that we're seeing right now. But you know, one was war and the other was sanction, which even according to the United States Department of State categorization is a form of war, is a form of militarization. I believe what they call it is it's a military operation, so they call it mutwa, if I'm not wrong, military operations other than war. So sanctions are categorized as a military operation, you know, even from the state's point of view. There's no debating that. But you know, it's a form of warfare that's not often talked of as a war because it doesn't have the kind of the regular identifiable indexes of what war looks like. So, you know, for me and the quiet of the boxes, and I feel like the, you know, maybe the lure of the boxes with the light coming through, and also probably the references that they make to the history of minimalist art and use of the cube and use of the light, for me was important and interesting to contrast that. So that was one, but also I think the other thing that perhaps connects the works together, or my experience of working on one project in parallel to the other or following the other, was that, you know, through this project, I was thinking a lot about how many of us from this region that they refer, and this is actually one of the bunkers from the site, that, you know, this is not a Donald Judd and Flavin installation. This is underground at the training site, and it was really hilarious to actually experience that there. But you know, the other thing that I was thinking was that, you know, in sitting and talking to these veterans and listening to their, you know, recollections of the site and recollection of the place where they were, you know, I was interested in their points of view because it was a vantage point that to me felt like had a lot of potential, because they're, you know, they're not in these cities, they're not living in Baghdad, they're on a base, you know, kilometers away from many things, for the most part, you know, protected, and, you know, and they go in and out with escorts, and they have like diplomatic protection or whatever status they're on. It's not the same as just visiting Iraq, for example, or visiting Iran or visiting Afghanistan or whatever. So this kind of this relationship to a place was really strange for me, and I wanted to hear, you know, what kind of recollections comes out of that sort of relationship to a place. But at the same time, I was thinking, you know, many of us from the region can't go back home for obvious reasons that have to do with this history of colonization and imperialism and violence and aggression and occupation and sanctions and the waves of refugees that it creates and the waves of forced migration that it creates. So in a way, these soldiers somehow worked as surrogates for me to have access to a weird type of information about the experience of being in a place that I would have loved to visit. You know, if I could just take a ticket, buy a ticket and go to Aleppo, or buy a ticket, go to Baghdad, and buy a ticket, go to Ramallah, and like visit these cities that have so much history that I've always been curious about and are part of the region and mean something to me as culture and as landscape and as places of dialogue and proximity to where I come from. And I don't have that option, and neither do many of us. But these soldiers get to go there because of the war. So I kind of use their narratives in a way, and of course, you know, those narratives don't really help me like get a sense of what it's like there, but I kind of wanted that to surface, that, you know, we have this sort of, I have access to this person's narrative. I don't know what to make of it, or I don't know how to digest it, or if it does anything to me, but they're kind of the surrogates to a lot of these places that I've always been really, you know, curious about. I would have loved to visit, but I can't because of the situation. And neither can the people that are from those cities because of the amount of destabilization and violence that's going on. So that was kind of how I was seeing part of my relationship with them. But I feel like there's a similarity in the way that the packages work, that they kind of like, you know, what I put in a package. And sometimes I do think about this in this really childish way of like, you know, like wish I could like shrink really small, and like I think about like, you know, what does the content of my package see, you know, when they're shipped overseas? How can they like cross the border, and like I can't with the same ease? I mean, there's no ease with them either, but there's it's easier for them. So it's almost like I send my kids back home and I receive things back, you know, or like my parents like sending me things. It's almost like I went home and I took something off the shelf, which is literally some of the objects that are in these boxes. You know, there's tiny little things that no one really cares about but me. And then the other part, which is probably the most unsettling part of that, was that there's a lot of ads, and you know, this is something that I've worked with in the other performance that was at Articule, the Divana performance, that a lot of these ads for jobs or, you know, for recent refugees are in such training sites. For example, in the space, there's a lot of new refugees from, at the time at least, I don't know, my information is a few years old. I'm sure things have changed in worse ways, but you know, there were new refugees who were hired in the site to play extras, you know, either as merchant or terrorist or baker or insurgents or whatever, and they're literally you know, put in these, in very much similar to the extras in Hollywood, perhaps different in terms of payment, and I don't know, I'm sure there's also differences, but you know, these are the jobs that are offered to people who have, you know, left areas of massive violence to be able to survive and have a life for their families, and I don't want to talk like they don't have any agency and they don't know what they're doing, but the fact that these are roles, or these are jobs defined for people and designed for these people is really unsettling to me. So, you know, and encountering them in this alley and being in such proximity to them as they're on the job and doing their thing, of course, in the most exaggerated, typical cliche ways you can imagine, was very uncomfortable. That, you know, there was a moment that I wish I could like nudge someone or like extend my hand or like, you know, like sit down and talk with somebody instead of like being like this tourist in this site. But, you know, I was also going through a lot of things in this place. So it was really, it was a really bizarre experience in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Did the veterans that you interviewed, did you tell them about the project? Or did you know what it was going to be at the time?
I knew what it was going to be, but I didn't, I told them very little information. I even, you know, approached most people under a pseudonym because I didn't want it to become a thing of, oh, then we keep having this dialogue and talk about, I wanted the work, I wanted my encounter with them to be a transaction, and that transaction was, I'm doing research on this thing. And I mentioned possibly for a documentary, I'm an artist, and these are my questions, and we're not going to get into many aspects of this conversation, but these are the things that I would like to know about. And of course there were, and there were some of them that I knew, they were friends of friends or friends, partners, or, or collaborators or colleagues that I felt a lot more comfortable with and knew exactly what I was doing. But the ones that responded to my call, I framed it as a transaction, and we sat in a public space and I recorded their voice, and everything was clear about, what information I'm using or what is off the record, if they were willing to talk. So yeah, some did and some didn't.
Yeah, I'm so curious to know more about, you're so good with titles. So I thought maybe, because the title of this particular exhibition is a bit opaque for some who don't read Arabic or know that alphabet. Do you want to tell us more about it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that title, in Farsi we say sandbad, which I thought like it's parallel to sandbox, which is what the military calls the site or this village the box, like referring to playground, or what do you call it, the sandbox, which is the part of the playground for children to have like imitation houses or imitation relationships or whatever. So it's a site of simulation, it's a site of training, but taking it out of the context of a place where a child plays, to a military training site, and calling it a box was really jarring, but also not surprising at the same time. And I paralleled that with sandbad, as we call it, or Sinbad, which is the icon of Disney's Orientalist fantasies. And all the iterations of it coming in different kinds of cliches, in Western media and cinema and animation and etc., which going to, again, like this is a training site, but then the frames that I had previously of I'm going in the wrong direction. The frames that I had of the fair, I'm going in all kinds of wrong directions. Where is that? Oh, these ones. So, these are kind of the typical cliche imagery of, the genie out of a bottle, etc. Which, again, the dome, the existence of the domes, and even one of the veterans mentions in the film that when I asked her what this like the first time that she saw the land, the city, what it looked like, she said it reminded her of Aladdin, and that was something that I didn't really see it coming in this way, but she just mentioned it, and and that's when I made the connection between, oh, this is why they make these sites in this way, because it reminds people of a certain kind of reference that they have of the region. So it communicates, like as it's surprising to me, but it communicates comfortably to whoever it's supposed to be communicating to. So and then I kind of did a word play with the boxes, the mailing, the shipping boxes of which this might be a stretch, but I was thinking, it's almost like this lit box that there could be something inside. It could be the genie coming out of the it could be the genie coming out. There's like a mysterious aspect to it that could be projected. But also if you think about it in terms of security and surveillance, there is the suspicion that there's something in these boxes, and that's why the US Customs needs to know what's inside. But they're hollow, and there's just light inside. So I was trying to make these parallels and these kind of circuits. Hopefully hoping that one of them would break.
We have a question from the audience. Do you see anti-war gestures as the same as peaceful gestures?
That's interesting. Well, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. I mean, anti-war position or gesture can be peaceful, can be not. But I feel like what defines it is intentionality and taking a position and not just. There's a difference between saying, "Oh, I'm not pro-war," and it's another thing to say that I'm anti-war, because then that changes your relationship to sources of funding, that changes your relationship to institutions, that changes your relationship to what on a fundamental level benefits from ongoing different types of war. So yeah, I do see them different. I don't see them mutually exclusive.
I feel like I want to take us back like to a time when we were working on, we were writing something together, and I remember you had this like great line of thinking about your work and process as, I have it written down. You wrote something like, "We write and make films as a way to create something else that is not lost, that has not disappeared. For this reason, our interests turn to the power of the improbable, what is unlikely to emerge as expression, when imaging new modes of remembering, archiving, and recalling. We are in it for the surprise." But you had like come up with this, and I think we wrote this like maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, but I keep thinking about, this, that your research and your process is what defines what becomes your practice, and that for me is so integral to what you're able to produce and what you're able to come up with. And I feel like this kind of, you're taking this other position of thinking about something as not having disappeared, but also you're creating it at the same time. I feel like in your reveal, like I had mentioned, like, your practice is so much about revealing what's unseen, but then I feel like you're also giving us something new at the same time. And Medina Wassel, I felt like the film really was layered in that way, that we were able to kind of sit through it to keep with what else will be revealed that will take us by surprise. So I feel like this is something that is actually crucial to you and your practice. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a question. It's just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that, in terms of what is not yet lost, I feel like, I've been, this goes back to what I was saying in terms of, identifying as like, what type of artist am I? Or like, more than what type of artist am I? It's to me, it's more a question of what do I look at when making art? Literally, where do I look? Where do I turn my head? And, I turn my head to a lot of, I don't know, social sciences and humanities texts. I turn my head to a lot of cinema. I turn my head to poetry. I turn my head to, I don't know, taking a walk and looking at the sky, old photos, oral histories, talking to, peers, the news, and my immediate surrounding, the artist community, the community. But I feel like recently, like the question for me has been, again, it's not recent, it's again this question of what do you aestheticize, what do you bring in the realm of the aesthetics, which is the first question that any artist has, that like of all the possibilities in the world, why do you make this thing as opposed to the other, which is a question that I always have for the students. And it's a question that I feel like it's the most helpful thing for me to think about when making any other decision. But recently I've been thinking about how can we, art has a lot of abilities for a lot of us to process, what is going on, what has been going on, but also possibilities in terms of, how would things look like had they turned differently, there were many possible scenarios for 2020 as a year that has turned all kinds of dark and is continuing to going so, and is a symbol of what's to come, or the decades that are to come. But this year could have been many different scenarios, but it ended up being this way because of all the historical turns that we took, from, I don't know, thousands of years ago to 2 years ago, doesn't matter. But I feel like I'm interested in revisiting scenarios where, which is something that I believe, I never talk about my work in terms of science fiction. I feel like I'm not read enough in terms of science fiction, or is not really a term that I feel like is the closest to my practice. But I feel like it's the thing that science fiction allows us to do, right? Imagine in different scenarios of what like 2050 would have looked like, or what 2036 would have looked like. In the most, immediate, really unsettling case, for example, with Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and thinking about Los Angeles, and rereading that during quarantine, and thinking about, how a person was able to envision this many years ago, and how close it is to our reality. So we do have the ability to imagine things other ways, imagine them either better, lighter, more peaceful, or more violent and darker and impossible as it is right now. But I feel like more than processing and looking back retrospectively, as artists, we need to also be prepared somehow. And this preparation, I mean, this is what education, I guess, is supposed to be doing, preparing us for a different relationship with the world, preparing us for a more critical relationality to other things and people and entities and objects and spaces and architecture and everything. And I've been really curious about lately, this has been where my head is, thinking about a sort of, I don't know, affective immunity in terms of fascism. And I feel like we're not prepared enough. We're not emotionally mature enough to really like collectively really build coalitions against what's coming and what's been coming all these years. And there's been all these ways that we've been penetrated. And by we, I mean all of us. I'm not talking about me and my friends, or like me and my group of whatever, like elite intellectual friends, or me and my family. I'm talking about us as one species among others who lives on this planet. And I've been really thinking about what are the possibilities, what are the intersections of writing, poetry, cinema, moving image, to create different sensibilities where we're more alert to these tidal waves of fascism that's coming at us worldwide, and has been. There's no denying that. But in this scale and at this pace, and feeling so desperate against it, and feeling so vulnerable, because we are, it's like the virus. It came and we were not prepared. It's been coming and we have not been prepared. And I'm not saying that the response to that is like leftist propaganda, but what I'm saying is an alertness and awareness in terms of the images that we're being fed, in terms of the sounds and the sonic relations, in terms of the tactile relations that we have to the world, and how we just tuning to whatever's in front of us out of exhaustion and tiredness and whatever it is. But really being scrutinizing and also being really like selective about what we digest as sounds and as images and as texts and as whatever that has to do with the senses and the aesthetic. So that's what I mean by, the question of, in search of an anti-fascist aesthetics, that's what I'm trying to understand, because when we think about the relationship between aesthetics and fascism, when we think about the relationship between aesthetics and Nazi propaganda, we're very familiar with that. We know exactly how that shit is being used. We know exactly the potentials of it, and we know how strong it is and how powerful it is and how influential it is. But how do we think about the opposite? And I know that the opposite, an anti-fascist aesthetic, cannot be something that fits within one frame, because then it falls into the same problem that it's trying to avoid. But it's something that's fleeting, and it's something that's supposed to be in conversation, constantly changing, mutating, constantly, reflecting on itself and growing, and and maybe like shedding its skin and moving into something else. But it's something that I want to think about as a question to pursue, as a challenge, as an ongoing exploration. And those are the kind of artists that I feel like that inspire me, artists that keep questioning the structures that we have adopted, from the smallest things like the way that we create biographies and resumes and the headshots and how we present ourselves. How do we question these standardized ways of representation that might benefit us and make us a little less susceptible to accepting grand forms of just being and acting and being in relation to each other and being and being one of the many professionals in our field. That was a rant, but that's where my head is.
No, it was great. I loved hearing every word of it. Thank you. I think we're coming to time, but maybe I can ask you one more question. I guess in thinking about your work and also thinking about some of even while writing your essay, I was really like grappling with kind of like the term of archive. And I felt like in some ways you were anti that and not sure how or why. And I wanted to ask you that. I just wanted to ask about your process in that regard too, because it seems like it's really embedded in a process of archiving something, but also undoing that at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, my relationship to archives, I'm sure this is not that something that you're unfamiliar with. There's a lot of reluctance to engage with them because of the way that they're formed, because of the way that things are collected, because of the way that information is accrued and organized in this way, and because of very problem of their non-existence or our lack of access to them. For example, in my work, there's really, I mean, this is something that maybe a lot of Iranian artists are dealing with. There's really no archives of cinema and TV that we can access, both in or outside, because there's walls that you cannot penetrate, obviously. So there's always a way of going around them, or being intentional about making this distance or this gap or inaccessibility part of the work, which I feel like is something that somewhere down the line in my work I had to embrace, that my mode of working always has some sort of trace with distance and gap and trying to bring something from one side of a cliff to another, and this thing keeps falling, and and like my work maybe is that dip, I don't know. But where did I go with that? Archives, okay. But I do look back at a lot of like bundles of things like newspapers or things that I can that from their overwhelming mass of information I can withdraw something that that would be meaningful to my process, because again, I'm interested in how these things are formed. What do we call an archive, and why do we need them, and what other forms of preservations are out there that to me, I mean, it's tricky, because like if I keep relying on like memory and and embodied experience and everything, it all becomes about like my individual experience, and that's its own trap, and it's difficult and it's problematic to some extent. But at the same time, I think that's kind of one avenue that I've been exploring, and I'm thinking out loud, but maybe that's also a way of using myself as a surrogate to for myself. I'm not saying that this is accessible to like everybody else who encounters my work, but I'm thinking about my process as also a way of maybe making my body that bridge that connects the cliff together, so that something can cross these two sides. But yeah, thinking about that space, thinking about that gap, thinking about this lack of access between two sides of an experience, or two sides of an information, and how whatever form we're thinking of it. But also, I mean, I like, to be quite honest, I feel like maybe another thing that I have, and maybe it's subliminal, or maybe it's I'm very aware of it, is that when things become art world trendy, I turn as far away from them as possible. So like when everyone starts talking about like being an interdisciplinary artist, I kind of want to just be undisciplinary. Or when people say, my work is about, I don't know, X and Y and Z, and then you hear that from like 20 million other artists saying that their work is about the same thing, you wonder, and then I just kind of turn away from at least using the same words, even though if it's present in my work. But that's just a personal diva-ness.
I love that. I relate to that for sure. But also, I think in saying that, to go back to just talking about embodied experience and being careful with that, so it's not just serves you as the individual artist, but you often do embed yourself in your work in certain ways, right? So it's, and especially through your more performance pieces, and in the film you do show up, and I wonder, and there's that intense, amazing gaze that you give back to us, and I feel like that part of the film is just so powerful. I don't know if you wanted to talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. It's not something that I'm 100% shying away from. I feel like there are ways that can be instrumentalized in ways that would make the work perhaps more resonant, or, add a different kind of dimension to it. But I feel like it's been more my presence in the work lately, at least my bodily, my physically presence in the work lately has been more in the form of reenacting somebody else, acting or reenacting somebody else. And I see that as very much a presence, but a sort of a removal, or again, maybe a form of surrogacy, where I'm using my body with whatever connotations and meanings and whatever that comes with it, but also trying to use it as a way that it's not, I'm hoping that it's not about, me as the artist, but more like me as the observer. And I don't really know if those two things can be different. And that might be a dilemma for me to really, maybe I'm contradicting myself right now. But I did feel like it was important for this film to have my to have my wearing the uniform. One, because, you know, as a kid, I always had this fantasy of wanting to, it was like part of, like, I think the queerest aspect of my childhood was wanting to be a soldier and a child soldier, you know, and like to be taken hostage because I'm in it for the for the right cause, and, you know, like feeling like I have meaning in life, and, you know, and of course because I wanted to be like one of the boys, and like I wanted to like be on the front line and like on these photos and everything, again because of the power of propaganda. But kind of but that became interesting and complicated as I tried to, you know, get access to the uniform. A friend was helping me back home, and the uniform came in one of the boxes. So, you know, I had the uniform of the Iranian military in one of those boxes crossing border. No big deal. And then I wore the uniform actually traveling in the desert, not full on, but, you know, I went camping in it. And that was a whole other really bizarre experience, you know, with the different kind of reactions that I got from people, and how it actually passed for like any active duty person, and not necessarily recognizable as Iranian or otherwise, because I was not wearing the hat. So it was not like quite identifiable. And that was, again, another part of the, you know, like I wrote down in my diary, it's not part of the film, but that was a really strange experience of, like, you know, being in proximity to so many military towns and like traveling through them in this uniform as part of the work. And and then kind of collapsing these two, of like the way that I'm perceived in the same uniform with the image of my childhood, you know, idols, and actually wearing it and like experiencing it, and then putting it on film. Could it be somebody else, an actor that I had hired and done the same thing? I would say definitely yes. It's not about really like, besides my experience for my own sake, but in terms of the film itself, it could have been any of my colleagues who had a similar experience, not just a random actor probably, but, you know, anyone who had a similar kind of relationship to these, you know, uniforms or places or memories could have been the same way.
Interesting. I wonder. Yeah. Well, I think we've come to time, but do you have any last words or comments or anything you'd like to say? I feel like I tired you out.
No, but I do want to say that if anyone would like to see the film, I'm more than happy to share a link in any way possible. You know, these things are not precious. I don't have a gallery. No one makes money off of my work. So the more people they see it, if they feel like sitting 31 minutes and watching art right now, I'm happy to share a link.
Thank you. That's so generous of you. Thank you, Gelare. Before we go, I do have just a few more thank yous. Any work done at Plug In is done collectively and with many people involved. So I really want to thank our staff, Luther Kanedu, who's Plug In's public program coordinator, Erin Josephson Laidlaw, our operations manager, Madeline Defoe, our communications coordinator, and Allison Yearwood, Plug In's executive director. I want to give a really special thanks to the installation team at Plug In, who put so much work into the installations. They were headed by Theo Sims, our head preparator, and for the two exhibitions that were up at Plug In, he received assistance from Craig Love, Rob Snowbird, Colin Zip, Roger Crate, and Colby Richardson. I also want to express a big thank you to Colby and Scott from Collective Broadcast Co. for facilitating our online live stream in order for us to be together tonight. And before I go, I want to remind you all to tune in on Monday, November 9th at 7 p.m. Central for a discussion with the curators and filmmakers of an incredible video program that is part of Sovereign Intimacies. Please don't forget to check out the full lineup of programming for Sovereign Intimacies, which will be taking place through the month of November and up until December 9th. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and see you all soon again.
Thank you, Nasrin.
Thank you, Gelare.